So the Nebraska men's basketball team ended its season last night, 72-66 loss to Penn State. Huskers played one of their best first halves of the season, staked themselves to a 14-point lead. Penn State caught them quickly in the second half within probably 7.5 minutes. And then it was a close competitive game all the way to the end. Penn State took a 4-point lead, I think, with 2:22 left. Never got much closer than that, but it was close and competitive. Huskers end their season at 7-20. Their record has to be taken in context with the historic play of the Big Ten this season. Best conference in America, one of the best conferences ever. You're probably going to see 9 teams make the NCAA tournament. And if Indiana were to win 2-3 games, which is unlikely, but you never know, then you could see 10. So that's pretty amazing when 10 of 9 of 14 teams make a conference, make the NCAA tournament. That's almost a lock to happen. It's very impressive. You could see 2 number 1 seeds, and quite honestly, you could see 2 number 2s. I think as it stands right now, I'm confident they'll have at least 1 number 1 and 2 number 2s. And then it could go up to 2 number 1s and a number 2. And then Purdue, if Purdue wins the Big Ten championship, Purdue's probably going to be a number 2 seed too. So extraordinary play in the league this year. Nebraska was 7-20, played 16 NCAA games against NCAA tournament teams, 16 of its 27. I think I don't think Nevada or McNeese State are going to the dance, are they? I don't think so. But they played 2 non-conference games against Georgia Tech and Creighton, and they lost both those games. Both of those teams are going to the NCAA tournament, barring positive COVID tests. And then they played the 9 teams in the Big Ten. That's what I'm counting anyway. Michigan State twice, Maryland twice, Iowa, Michigan, Rutgers, Wisconsin twice, Purdue, Illinois. Who am I missing? I think that's everybody.
Yeah.
Ohio State. Of all those games, now assuming that those are the teams that end up, I mean, we got to be honest. They really only won one of them, and that was against Rutgers. So, although the analytics look really good and they're very solid and all the rest, they played a lot of NCAA tournament teams this year, and they really only won one of those games. And so, in many years, they would have done better than that. And I think there's a lot to work on. But what did you see last night, this season? You name it.
Well, I mean, I checked in for the first half last night and was, impressed early on with what Nebraska was doing. But it just felt like it was the same script over and over again. Either they fell behind and never came back, or they built a lead. And I checked in on that game last night, midway through the second half, got into doing some other things, but came back to it. And like you said, they had blown the lead. Penn State was up by a few points there at the end. And it's just like, I wasn't surprised. Like every game was that way. It was going to be close. Other than Rutgers, you just knew Nebraska was going to go into one of those patented scoring droughts. You knew they were going to live and die by the 3. More often than not, it was the latter. It was an interesting development after Teddy Allen left the program to see how it seemed like they shared the ball a little bit more. It looked a little bit closer to what Fred Hoiberg had been wanting to do in terms of driving and kicking out and setting each other up for offense and things like that. But, ultimately it felt like it was the same thing. When I look at the team, it feels like they just need a talent upgrade still, and they need more chemistry together. And I know those things, sometimes it feels like those are mutually exclusive, where you're constantly trying to upgrade talent. And by doing that, you're turning the roster over and you're not able to build that chemistry. So it'll be interesting to see how much they want to turn over the roster here in the off season. And maybe you have a better sense of that. But I guess I wanted to ask, You talk about putting this season in context. It kind of reminds me of football a little bit, where we look at this 2021 schedule coming up and see how historically difficult it is. And we've said, maybe the football team will improve, but it won't reflect in the record because of the quality of opponents that it faces. Is your contention then that this Nebraska basketball team was a market improvement over the first year, even though the record is the same and ultimately the destination is no different than it was last year?
The analytics would tell you that Nebraska was a much better team this year. I obviously reserve the right to change my mind, Evan. But Nebraska's football schedule in 2021 is not as hard as Nebraska's basketball schedule just was, in my opinion. I could be wrong about that. I don't anticipate. There's a difference between names on a schedule. Ooh, there's Michigan, and knowing what Michigan is and isn't. Mm-hmm. And according to Ken Palm, the Big Ten has the number 3, 4, 5, 7, 11, 13. I could go on here. 30, 33, 35. And by the way, the number 35 team is 11 and 13 Penn State that Nebraska just played last night. It's not the same. So I don't anticipate Nebraska's football schedule being that same level of difficulty. People so the difficulty of Nebraska's basketball schedule is somewhere, it's kind of off the charts. It's close to as hard as certainly they've ever had. And they also had a month-long COVID pause in there. So that's something I also don't anticipate the football program dealing with. The analytics say that Nebraska was a lot better this year. I've kept track of some numbers, visually. I think I showed those to you last week. Nothing has changed about that. There's a visual picture that tells you that Nebraska is much more competitive than it was last season. That, there's some context there too. That team kind of gave up. I mean, there were some guys on that team that were checked out. And had they not checked out, maybe it would have looked different, but they did. And so I think Hoiberg's own comments about this team, the way that he liked it, he loved it coaching them, the effort that they consistently gave, the willingness to keep fighting despite horribly long odds, I think would indicate that they were a much more improved team. But of course, that narrative is now done. Like it ended last night, today, the next 3 or 4 days, and then you turn the page. Like it's not that story is kind of over, and now you start the new story. And I thought some of the things that happened last night were indicative of maybe some of the things that they want to work on. And of course, he talks about consistency and wanting to reduce turnovers. He's right about that. They had problems with turnovers last night. They had their share, especially in the second half. They had problems keeping Penn State off the offensive glass. That was a recurring theme with the program for many years. But also again last night, that issue predates Fred Hoiberg. But it's not his fault, but it is his now issue to resolve. They've improved as a team in terms of shooting the 3 ball, but I felt like their strategy last night was to hope they hit 12 of them. I wrote a tweet early. Like this was before this is when they had only hit like a couple of threes. And then they went on to hit like 4 more in the first half. And I got a text from someone, oh, it looks like that. And I'm like, yeah, okay. Well, we'll see how it turns out. But I think I wrote it's always possible Nebraska hits 12 threes tonight in the Thunderdome, which is what I was saying was the Lucas Oil Stadium. But somebody might want to get to the rim. They might want to get home at the rim. And they hit 9. If they'd hit 12, they would have won the game. But they didn't. They hit 9. And they didn't really get to the rim that much. They got there sort of. I mean, they hit 12 layups. Some of those were, fast break plays, or they were, putbacks. Derek Walker had one that was thrown right to him by a Penn State player, and he just laid it in. But I'm talking, when I say get to the rim, a guy gets all the way to the rim and he makes a basket. And Banton had 3 in a row like that midway through the second half. But those plays are fewer and farther in between. And let me tell you, when you don't get those plays at the rim, you better hit your threes, because you're probably not going to hit a lot of those pull-up jumpers. And, Nebraska doesn't have Kofi Coburn. They don't have a guy that can put his back to the basket and, work through a double team and make a 12-foot shot. They're going to have that player at least by the 2022 season. I can tell you that they've got that guy committed in Blaze Kaida, but he's not here yet, and he won't be here next year. And I don't know if Adoro Andre is going to develop into that, and I don't know if Derek Walker is going to develop into that. So some of the issues that they're going to have that they've got to try to resolve is how do you score when you're not hitting a bunch of threes? Like how do you get your points? They did some really nice things where they got cutters and things like that, and their spacing was pretty good, but they don't hit a ton of shots between 5 and 22 feet very often. That's just not who they are as a program. And that's okay, but you got to get more at the 5 foot. You got to get more consistent in there. Last night they went 12 of 21, a lot of shots blocked, a lot of shots altered. They get all the way there and they got to kind of pass it out. So those are tough things, Evan. Like getting downhill and getting to the rim is like a run game in football. The more you do that, the more the defense is leery of it. The more they sag into the lane to make sure you can't do it, the more you hit those threes. And that's part of what there's a reason why teams run the pack line defense and they take it away. And they take it away because they know that if that part of the game gets going, that everything else gets going. Mm-hmm. And I don't think Nebraska consistently got that this year. They're probably looking for a point guard, so on and so forth. I could go on, and we'll write several pieces about it. It was my first year covering it, so it's a journey to some degree. I'm still learning a little bit.
I was going to ask you about that. I mean, it's your first year doing it, and it was all on Zoom. Like, how do you feel like that dynamic, just for you, played into that, covering the team on Zoom, watching it in an empty arena? Did it provide like any level of extra objectivity because you were a little detached, or did you feel like it took away because you weren't able to, be more immersed in what was going on?
It takes away. It takes away, Evan. It takes away. It takes away from the experience because you want to get to know the players and the coaches. You want to get a sense for them. I thought it took away from football this year too. Like you get a sense of someone's body energy and body language and, just sort of personal vibe. And when you lose that essence, when you're doing it over Zoom, it just becomes harder, it's harder to pick up on empathy. It's harder to give empathy. I'm probably the reporter that asks the hard questions a lot of the time across both beats. And so, that's not always, I can ask the critical questions sometimes, and that's not always the fun position to be in. And over Zoom, it comes across as, you can be the guy that's trying to look at the negatives. But, I at the end of the day, the teams combined for 10 total wins. And of course, football's, there's only 12 games, but so you look at winning percentage and, the winning percentage this year just wasn't real high. It was lower last year, I think, because they played 32 games in basketball instead of 27. But these are tough times. But Hoiberg, again, everybody knew this was going to be a rebuild. Tim Miles gave it a really good shot. And one of his most talented teams just couldn't handle whatever. They had one guy get hurt in Copeland, and then it fell apart. Shouldn't have fallen apart, but it did. And so everybody kind of knew he was going to go. And when he did, there wasn't a lot left. He knew that. They were going to rebuild it. And I think he had a plan to do that. But they weren't going to be good last year if Tim Miles had been the coach. I mean, they weren't going to be an NCAA tournament team. More than likely. Yeah. And they probably were going to struggle this year too. I mean, I think part of Miles' long-term plan was to get Chucky Hepburn and Hunter Salas. And that seems to always be the story of like, well, just about the time the guy got let go, is the time they were going to start getting the in-state recruits. I mean, Doc was going to get a Koya Gao, and Tim was going to get Hunter South and Chucky Hepburn. That's a good story. I don't know that that's true or not. It's hard to say. Those guys made the choices they made, but so I think Fred always knew that it was gonna be kind of a rebuild. The first year was closer to year zero because they had to scramble to basically fill up their roster. And in doing that, I think they got a team that didn't have a ton of chemistry and just didn't have a ton of internal chemistry. It's too bad they couldn't keep Cam Mack. I think Cam Mack obviously didn't fit the program last year, but I think Cam Mack's a pretty good player and would have helped this team too. I think Cam's got a lot of ability and obviously didn't fit here. But, Cam to me fit Nebraska better than Teddy stylistically. Teddy Allen's a ball dominant player who probably fits somewhere else, probably not Nebraska. Cam, I think, did really, move the ball around and had the ability to get deep into the lane and all those things. So, they weren't able to keep him, and then they kind of started over again, and everybody saw the product. There were moments when it was really good. The one thing I would say for people to watch as Hoiberg has conversations with players next week is that the starting lineup and the minutes started to shift in the last 6 or 7 games of the year, and Thor and Kobe Webster can come back, and it's worth watching because if Thor and Kobe Webster decide to come back, then it's reasonable to assume that they're going to continue to move in the direction of incorporating those guys into things, especially Kobe Webster. I mean, Kobe Webster was, averaging 12, 13, 14 points a game in the last 5 or 6. So there's something there, and it's a good thing. And you don't necessarily want to – he started to really find that, all right, I'm a shooter, and I'm a scorer, and I'm going to try to make shots. And all of a sudden it started to feel pretty good with Kobe. So we'll have to see if those two guys come back. That's one big question. They don't have to. They certainly can, but they don't have to. And then you've got to have the conversations with some of the other guys whose minutes went away. So Ivan Ouedraogo's minutes kind of disappeared. He didn't play last night. As I recall, I don't think he played against Northwestern. And then Shamil Stevenson, his minutes kind of went up and down depending on the opponent. But I don't know if this is what Shamil Stevenson was looking for. When he came here to Nebraska, I think the expectation is he was going to be more than, a 5 point, 2 rebound a game guy who's averaging, I don't know how many minutes he averaged. So, and then, I think Delano Banton's going to be back, but at the same time, Banton went from being the focal point of the offense and sort of the point man to coming off the bench. And Trey McGowan's took over the point man role. And then last night, Trey said, I was recruited to play the on-ball position, to play the point guard position, and I'm going to start doing, you're going to see a lot more of that. And I thought that was a notable comment because, while that's true, Trey was a better college basketball player than Banton was prior to the season. I just thought that was notable that he said that because he didn't really start the season as the guy bringing up the ball, but he did end the season that way. So those are the things to watch. Those are the things. And if Derek Walker is going to graduate, then in theory he can transfer without penalty too. My understanding is that he's going to be coming back, and he might be the most important player of the bunch because they're a better team when Derek Walker's on the floor, a much better team.
Interesting. So do you? I've seen fans put it out there too, like next year's the year. Like, do you get a sense for where it's going? Like, does this next
fans are impatient or they're hopeful?
Sure, but like when you look at the recruiting class coming in with some of the guys that they may potentially keep around and the inevitable regression to some level that the Big Ten is going to undergo this year, like, how do you see that all coming together as far as Nebraska is concerned? Are they moving up to that kind of middle of the pack sort of bubble conversation next year, or where do you see it going?
Yeah, I think they can move up to the 8, 9, 10 slot, and once you do that, you're usually in the bubble combo. Yeah, I think they can do that. It's kind of dependent on who leaves, what pieces they can add, and how good Bryce McGowan's is. If he can come in and average 13 points a game, shooting 45% from three, it'd be pretty good. If he comes in and he averages 7 points a game, shooting 32% from three, they're probably not as good. I mean, some of it's based on the quality of your players. I think the Big Ten will take a step back. I think that's just probably going to happen. I don't know how much of a step back they're going to take, in part because a lot of these players can come back. Actually, everyone can if they want. So we'll have to see who decides they want to go. I think Luka Garza is going to go. I think it's time. But, I don't know how many of these guys are going to leave. Illinois will be different. Illinois is probably going to be a different program. They're going to lose a couple guys, but they were pretty good without Io. And they're really good, actually, without him. So I think Illinois is not going anywhere. Penn State's probably going to get a little worse. Northwestern is going to get better. Minnesota, they're starting over. They're going to tank. They'll go to the bottom. It's going to be a fight to get out of that 11 through 14 game, though, for Nebraska. It is. Because Penn State's a damn good team. They're good. People do not appreciate how good they are. They were an 11. I mean, they beat Virginia Tech up one side of the court and down the other back in November, December. So Penn State's good. People look at Penn State and they're like, oh, no, they're a good team. And Minnesota was good before a bunch of guys got hurt. I mean, they were a top 20 team a month and a half ago. They were Nebraska 2 years ago. So these are all pretty good teams. And Nebraska doesn't get to change leagues. They don't get to play in the Pac-12. They got to play in the Big Ten. So I think the league will take a slight step back, but not significant. And Nebraska is going to really have to play some great basketball to make the NCAA tournament. I mean, it's such a challenge. Plus, you draw an ACC team every year. Plus, you draw Creighton every year. Creighton's going to take a step back. Creighton won't be as good next year. I will say that. Creighton's probably – they're going to have a rough go, I think, next year because they're going to lose Zagorowski and they're going to lose a couple other guys too. So